Good day everyone, and welcome to another creative video. Thank you all for being here. Absolute pleasure to be with you, in your company, coming through to you wherever you are in this wonderful world. In today's video, I'm actually working through some different type of colors and wanting to play around with some different colors that I normally would not use on a more consistent basis. And I wasn't going to film, but I thought, hey, why not give you guys the process and show you how this is going to work out, and the painting that I'm working this idea on. It's a really simple still life. It's nothing complicated, but again, I just want to show you how I work through colors that I don't normally use in combination on a more consistent basis. Also, if you haven't had the time to have a look at the video prior, which is all about monochromatic and painting monochromatic and using the palette knife, that was the last video. Have a look, go through the workaround and the discussions of how I painted that portrait. In case you need a reminder, it's these guys here that I worked on the last two videos. So yeah, have a stick around and see how that painting, those portraits were created using only the colors red. So generally I tend to use my colors that I love how they mix, or I don't even know how to define them, but you tend to always use colors that you are quote unquote comfortable with. I don't always recommend that you paint like that because your artwork tends to look exactly the same. So I always would advocate that you mix different style of colors in order to get and evoke a different mood and a different perspective for the viewer. So generally speaking, I've always said to you, start utilizing primary colors only, because from that foundation, you will be able to mix a myriad. I mean, you're going to be your own factory of mixing your own color on your palette board. But today, I'm still utilizing the whole idea of using red, yellow, and blue, so the primary colors. But my red, yellow, and blues are going to be totally different. Generally, the cadmium red, yellows, and blues are quite strong, and they're the ones that you want to start to use when you're starting out, because it gives you the best foundation in learning how to mix colors. But today I'm going to use a phthalo blue lake and permanent magenta and cadmium yellow deep. So here are my three colors that I'm going to work with, and of course white, that's going to be in there. But in terms of our colors, so there's my yellow, red, and blue, sticking to the whole primary colors, but certainly different tones altogether. So we're using a still life as our subject matter today, and it's going to be a mixture of purple plums, green acorn and green foliage, and a teal pot that they're all sitting in, the acorn are sitting in. So it's not going to be a standard color tone of what you would expect to see with your eyes, but certainly I'm going to work with these different red, yellow, and blues to see how I can create this still life. Like I said, I wasn't going to film this, but I thought, hey, why not take you guys through it and see the process that I work through. The reason why I decided to use phthalo blue lake is because it's an incredibly heavy pigmented blue. I mean, a little bit of this blue goes a long, long way. And so you have to be very mindful when you're creating your greens, when you're creating your purples, how much of it you use. So there's a lot of restraint in creating the different colors using phthalo blue lake. So yeah, that'll be something really, really interesting to work with. As always, it's going to be a palette knife kind of a day. So get ready to, again, get used to the palette knife and how it works. I've had a couple of questions in different videos that I've done on what palette knife this is. Again, there is no numbers on it, and there's different manufacturers and different brands. This brand is called Art Basics, and there's another brand called Pebble. And the reason why I named those two is I haven't been able to find a palette knife manufacturer that has the same, and you can see that, the same bend in that particular part of the knife, that one there. That's crucial in terms of being able to work with the painting knife on your board, because again, when you're holding it, this part of your hand doesn't actually touch the board or the canvas behind you. The size of this knife, again, I have absolutely no idea. I would say that could be maybe about 3, maybe 4 centimeters, I'd say. Again, have a note of the shape and see what if you can find that in a store. By the way, this kink here that you can see, that's just worn out. Okay, that's not, the knife doesn't come out like that. I've just had this for a very, very long time. And to be quite honest, I haven't been able to find that bend, this exact bend. I've looked and I've gone to high brand, high end art supplies in Australia, and it's just, it's been a bit of a hard slog trying to find that. I've still got a couple of other art stores to go to and see if I can get that particular bend in that particular shape, which is my favorite. But again, knives are very individual to painter. I've got plenty. I've talked about them before. I've done a video before of different branded knives, but it really is all about finding what you like, what suits you, what you like to work with. I've also talked about technique and how to use a knife. That video is pinned as my video at the top on my YouTube channel, and you can have a look at that as well. So in today's video, let's work with this knife using the colors that I mentioned, creating a still life artwork. So here's a really good example of what I said to you about phthalo blue being quite pigmented. And notice the amount that I've placed here on the board in comparison to the yellow. And as we start to mix, you can start to see just how powerful that blue is. I mean, we've added almost double the amount of yellow, which by the way is a series 4, so it's quite a strong pigment also. However, that blue is very overpowering, and have a look at just how deep that green is. So you have to be a little bit careful in terms of how much of that phthalo blue lake you start to mix in your colors. Again, here I'm wanting to mix a purple, and I've added the red, the permanent magenta in there. But again, that phthalo blue lake has got such a strong pigment. I mean, I love it. I think it's an amazing color. But if you're not aware or used to its pattern of behavior based on its molecular structure, getting a little bit scientific here, you can get quite frustrated when you mix color. So here's the first tone that I've mixed, but I really want to have a little bit more of a purple in there. So I'm just going to add a lot more red to it. And now you can see I've totally taken that tone right into the purple side. So again, be mindful of the colors that you buy. And this is also a good lesson in terms of when you're purchasing colors from the art store, getting a better or deeper, a stronger pigments is always my preference. And that's again purely because it gives me such a larger flexibility to be able to mix the colors that I require. Okay, so let's have a much closer look at the colors and the working of the palette knife for this plum on the left hand side. That particular plum too, by the way, is a lot more darker in color because it's sitting away from the light. So the colors that I had to use here, or the ratio of mixing this color, had to be a much bigger ratio of permanent magenta in comparison to the phthalo blue lake. So I did work the colors in first on my board, just so that I have got a much better idea of what I needed to apply in comparison to the other two plums on the right hand side. They're going to be a lot lighter. They're more in the blue color tone in comparison to this one being a lot more in the mauve dark red color tone. Notice also the way that I am using my palette. I'm actually working with the curvature of the fruit. I'm not just working up and down, left to right. I'm really concentrating on making sure that I maintain the structure of and the integrity of the shape of the fruit. That's quite important too. I found that out probably the hard way at times, but just, yeah, as you're starting to use the palette knife, just keep that in mind, because it's easy to just go left like that, and you lose the integrity of the actual shape of the fruit. These lighter, very light purple tones is where the actual light is hitting hitting this plum. Okay, there's a nice highlight there. It's going around that stem. A beautiful highlight there. So you can see as the knife, I'm also, by the way, merging a lot of different tones one into the other. So I'm continually painting wet into wet and blurring. These are very soft lines here, as you can see. You can see one tone merging into the next. So that's the other aspect that I love about palette knife, is that I love the wet into wet painting. Of course, that's just my technique, but you guys can develop your own. And you continually move that paint around. Now, there is a beautiful highlight, and even though I've already added the dark mauve here, there's a really nice lighter mauve in that section that I want to add. And I've just added a little bit extra white into that mixture. I think I might have gone overboard. Oh no, that's okay. And I'm just going to highlight that there. There we go. Okay. So I love the way that's taking shape, but what I've noticed is I am losing my darkest darks. And because this particular plum is sitting away from the light, I just need to make sure that I maintain the tonal values of this particular fruit as it's sitting in the composition. So I'm just I've just remixed a couple more darker tones and I'm going to add that. Okay, that's it. I can see that that's also going to go up there. Okay. The thing is, it's really easy to lose your darkest values, and if you do, you'll find that your lightest lights just won't come through with as much gusto as if your darks are placed accordingly. So yeah, just, you know, painting with a palette knife is easy to lose track of your darks because you're always correcting. It's almost like you're correcting as you're painting. You're not really you know, sticking in any particular direction. Okay, I'm going to leave that there and watch for a moment how, I mean, you can see that that's quite irregular for the moment. But as I zoom out, and you'll find that it's starting, and it will start to fit into our plum story. But there's the example of working the palette knife close up and how to add your tones working with that palette knife on a round object. Okay, let's move on. Note the colour differences between the two plums. The one on the left is far deeper into the red, while the ones on the right are a lot more into the blue colour tone. It was quite a challenge mixing the different colours, primarily because with the phthalo blue, again, because it's such a strong pigment, it will always come out incredibly cold and cool in its colour. So there was a lot of focus in mixing and adding a small dab of that yellow with the permanent magenta, as well as mixing anything that was grey on my board in order to calm down the colours. So my suggestion here is, if you're using a phthalo blue or any strong pigment, is to really focus on mixing your tones slowly and understanding the next value by measuring your values against the color that you've already added on your canvas. So the thing that I find quite annoying when I paint is the small subject matter, which can be quite frustrating. And so I find myself that if I'm wanting to use the brush just to make sure that I don't use the drawing, I muddle up the color tones. And so I resort back to saying, okay, stuff it. Let's just go back to the palette knife and add the color tones that way. And if I do kind of go over any certain aspect that I'm not happy with, I'll just correct it. So even though I start off with the brush just to get my bearings, I find that I have to quickly correct that and go back to the knife. For me, it just adds a nicer aspect to the painting. I don't know why, but yeah, that's why I kind of go back and forth and attempt to correct what I've done without losing the integrity of the actual painting or the composition for this matter. Okay, so these are the little acorns that I'm putting in now, and I'm just going to add the highlights as best as I can. I would suspect I'd have to come and correct them at some later point, but they're the little acorns that are dangling off that foliage. And now I'm going to go and simply add that foliage in there, starting with the darkest darks. I quite like painting foliage because I feel like I don't have to be as careful with it, which is really nice. Whereas sometimes with more precise objects, I'm going to have to take my time with it. But in this case, I quite enjoy not having to be that finicky about the whole matter. Okay, in this case here, we've got a couple of different color tones. We've got cool greens, warm greens. Some are sitting forward, some are sitting backward, as in the background, not the foreground. So I'm going to start off with those cool greens up here. The interesting aspect of acorn foliage is this: it has certain lines and shapes to the leaf. So I'm going to do my best not to lose that integrity, but I don't know if I really care at this point. That's the whole idea of having this work through, just so I can see how and what I need to kind of correct, not correct. It's an interesting thing as you're working through something, because you're always correcting in your mind, thinking, do I need to add a different tone? Do I need to lighten it, darken it? You know, what's the step or the process that I'm in? So I think what I'm going to do is really focus more on the shapes of those leaves. I'm not going to be too concerned of the detail, but perhaps later on I might just go over with a brush and just suggest the structure of the leaf a little bit better. But at this point, I quite like having a move around with the palette and focusing on the different color tones more so than representing a true image of the leaves. And again, because I'm working wet into wet, it really is nice as I'm painting at this point up here, being able to merge the colors without feeling like they're just kind of floating on top. That's the other aspect of my joy of painting wet into wet. I quite like that. So see, now that I've put in the foliage and the acorns are there, instantly I can start to now color correct the actual vase that they're sitting in. It needs to be a lot lighter in those blues because the sunlight's coming from this side, and that part up here is a lot lighter. So I will focus on correcting that in a moment. And I'm just going to continue with the foliage color and just finalize some of those shapes. Certainly the phthalo blue and the permanent magenta work quite well with the color of the plums, but if I wanted to vary the tonal values of that green, then I'd have to almost perhaps either go to a cadmium yellow, a lot warmer yellow, and obviously change the blue to something else. But again, it was a really, really interesting process, and I hope you guys got to see that as well in the application of the tones, the mixing, the creating of new color as well. And also it's really interesting that when you're working on this toned background, in this case this is craft paper, it gets my mind working differently, because I'm obviously, this is a warm background. I think if it was a cooler background, perhaps the tonal values of what I'm painting would be different as well, which I know you can achieve that if you do have or start off with a cool coloured tone on your canvas. But given that this was just a study, I really wasn't going to pay too much attention to that side of the painting. Okay. So I'm just adding in the or grounding in my subject matter here, making sure that they are sitting on their on the floor, on the ground, as they say. I'm not quite sure what the term is, but just making sure that basically they're not floating in the air, which sometimes it's easy to kind of overlook, because if we don't ground our subjects, they can look like they're floating. They basically haven't got a reference of place. So always make sure that you ground your still life by adding all the appropriate shades underneath them. So there you go. So that's pretty much the quick study of this still life of plums and acorns in a blue jar. Welcome back to day number 2. So I've let the painting dry overnight, and I also wanted to let it settle a little bit so that I can kind of let go of how it has imprinted itself on my mind. And it's really important to do that, because we get used to seeing that image in one way, and you start to sometimes find that it kind of gives you one direction, but really you should have gone into another. So leaving it overnight, at least the way that I work, is really important. So after I've come back the next day, what I found was that everything started to settle down, which was really, really good. So the colors settled down, if that makes sense. So they've almost merged. It's like when you marinate something, I suppose. It's kind of like everything's is come together. So a couple of things. The fact that I used those 3 color tones, the phthalo blue, permanent magenta, and the deep yellow, cadmium deep yellow, I think that was the name. I found that and they all lend themselves to being the cool family. It was really challenging to create a tone that was warm. So anything that was in the foreground, of course, you wanted it to be a little bit warmer, because it gives you that feeling of being closer to you, versus something in the background is in a cooler family. But other than that, it really did give me an option to practice mixing colors, because that phthalo blue lake is so strong that you have to concentrate. You have to think about how much to put in, what to mix. I mean, it really was at some points a little bit challenging. What are the things that have worked? Well, obviously, utilizing limited color palette, you are able to harmonize the painting a lot better. And by limiting your palette, you're able to then control the emotion of it. That's not to say that if you use 6, 7 different colors, you can't, but you really have to be good at mixing tones in order to bring your painting together. So I love the fact that that limitation gives you a lot more control, and also it gives you a better understanding in how to mix color tones. The thing that I found, which was very frustrating in terms of the foliage up here, is that the foliage itself had a lot more range, the cool, warm in between, and that became really frustrating. On a good note, I love the fact that it kept it simple, because the foliage was so in depth, lack of a better word. I had to then focus on simplifying that foliage and really just focus on 3 to 4 tones and then shapes. That was it. So in a good way, it was great to be able to have that limitation, but that's, like I said, that was one of my challenges. If you did notice also as we were painting, particularly when I demoed that first plum, there it is there, it really does look like as you're using the palette knife that it's not making sense, it's not coming together. But as you move back or step back from the artwork, you'll start to see that your mind is fusing all those steps together and creating the image of a plum. Thus why it's important to let something or leave your painting overnight and let that brain lose the image it has created, come back with a fresh mind the next day, and gives you the ability to see what you've done wrong, what you've done right, what you can correct, what you should leave alone. So I hope you were able to see that as I was painting with the knife, in particular the plum, that you start to doubt yourself. You start to begin to ask, am I applying the right paint? Is the technique right? But at some point in time, you have to surrender to the process and allow that image to slowly come together, just like a puzzle. So painting with a palette knife is no different than a brush. It just feels like you are not as in control using a palette knife versus a brush. The thing that you have to be mindful of is that a palette knife applies paint a lot different than a brush. And that's where a little bit of that doubt comes into play, because it's unnatural to paint with something metallic versus bristles and softness and so forth. So just be mindful that when you're starting to use a palette knife, those things that are uncertain for you, you have to work through them in order to allow them to surface and then instill assurance within you as you're painting. So here's a really good example of wanting to highlight how the focus really should be on a shape and tone versus what your mind's telling you to paint, that it has to be this shape leaf or that shape leaf. Notice the depth of, or the lack thereof, of detail, that it really has been all about creating motion within that foliage versus focusing on outlining exactly what that foliage looks like to our naked eye in real life. So the more that I zoom in into this particular shape, you see the actual workings of the knife and its behavior. But as we move out, the mind slowly starts to piece together the image of what we have painted, that being a couple of leaves, acorns, and plums. So it's really, really important that you don't berate yourself as you're going through this process that it doesn't look like something or that you've lost your way. Because let's even dive deep into that plum up here. And you see me paint it yesterday, and let's have a look in depth as to its exact shape. I mean, if I was to just simply point out at that particular step here, it really looks like nothing, like a round shape with semicircular, different colored movements around it. And yes, we know it's a piece of fruit, but if you really had no idea what that was, you would not be able to identify that as anything, because up close, our mind hasn't got a reference to what that actually is. As you zoom out, again, now we begin to understand that this is some type of a still life, and these are plums or fruit with a small vase and foliage. So again, it's really important not to lose sight that when you are painting with a palette knife, that it does become about motion and shapes and tones. As I mentioned yesterday, we could paint this plum up, down, left to right, but you won't be maintaining its structure. So find a couple of odds and ends around your house, fruit, onion, whatever you've got, and give painting with the palette knife a go. Focus on limiting your palette. Don't go out and have all these different colors on your board. It really will add a lot more to the confusion. Start to mix the tones slowly. Begin to focus on distance, middle, and foreground and create those tones accordingly. And then slowly apply the palette knife technique and create that artwork or that still life that you're wanting to do. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your time. Thank you for connecting. Thank you everyone for making this channel reach 3,000 followers. I'm absolutely overjoyed and grateful for everyone tuning in and for giving me all your kindness and support. As always, do not hesitate to ask any questions. I will absolutely do my best to provide you with as much information as I've gathered over the last 2 decades. And remember, as always, while you are in this world, you are the light of the world. Be you, amplify you, create, explore, and continue that creative journey with joy and with enthusiasm. Until next time, bye.